They said she was born with thunder in her lungs. The night Clara Mayfield came into this world, the sky split open over the Blue Hollow Ridge, and the preacher's wife bled herself into the floorboards. The midwife never made it home. Folks in town took that as a sign, said the Lord marked the child for something he didn't name. When I first saw her, she couldn't have been more than 16, pale as a candle stub, eyes too steady for someone that young. She'd stand outside the church while her father preached, not praying, not smiling, just watching the rain slide down the glass like it meant something. I've seen enough years to know the look of a soul that doesn't quite fit its skin. Clara had that. Her father raised her on scripture and silence, feeding her verses the way other men feed their livestock. She learned early that guilt was a language you spoke before you learned your own name. And yet there was a hunger in her not the kind a sermon could feed. People talked. They always do. They said she'd walk to the creek at night, whispering names of men who'd never come back from the mines. The Mayfield parsonage sat at the edge of a dying town, where the church bell rusted on its rope and the wind sounded like a congregation holding its breath. That's where she learned to smile, the kind of smile that made men forget they were married or holy or even alive. When she turned 18, the whole town gathered for her wedding. The groom was a quiet farmer, didn't know better than to think beauty was mercy. They said the chapel smelled like lilacs and iron that morning. I was there. I still remember how she looked walking down that white dress fraying at the hem, veil trembling like it wanted to hide from her face. Before I go further, tell me something. Where are you listening from? What time is it where you are right now? Because some stories don't care about the hour. They wait until you're alone, and then they start breathing again. If you wish to hear the rest of these forgotten confessions, stay with me. Subscribe and listen until the end. When the preacher asked them to speak their vows, Clara didn't lift her eyes to heaven. She turned to the man beside her and whispered something that made his face drain white. Later, when they kissed, she bit his lip until it bled, and the whole room went still. Her father called it passion. I called it warning. That night, the rain didn't stop, and by morning, the groom was gone. Only his hat was found near the barn. The creek water ran red for a week, and no one dared ring the church bell again. They said it was an accident. But I knew better. Because when I passed by the Mayfield house a few nights later, every window burned with candlelight, and through the glass, I saw her in that same torn wedding dress, dancing slow, as if the ceremony had never ended. By the time the sun rose over Blue Hollow again, Clara's smile had become part of the town's nightmares. Her husband's disappearance was spoken of only in whispers, mostly at the general store or behind the pews after service. Her father, the preacher, stood firm at the pulpit, quoting Job and Psalms about faith and suffering, pretending his daughter wasn't the reason no one came to church anymore. The benches grew emptier each Sunday until only the echoes of hymns were left. The Mayfield house began to rot from the inside out. Paint peeled, shutters hung crooked, and the air carried the sour smell of mildew and candle wax. Clara stayed mostly indoors. Folks said she had taken to painting portraits late at night, dozens of them, all of the same man, same missing husband. Some said she was trying to bring him back with her hands, brushstroke by brushstroke. Others said she'd gone mad, that her father had locked her away for her own good. But I know someone who saw what really went on inside that house. A boy named Silas Boone, barely 12, used to run errands for the preacher. He'd leave milk by the door and hear singing from inside, not hymns. Love songs, slow and sad in a language he didn't know. One evening, curiosity got the better of him. He peeked through a crack in the window and swore he saw the groom himself, standing behind her in the parlor mirror, smiling with lips black as ash. After that night, Silas wouldn't speak for days. When he finally did, he told his mother. The man wasn't dead, he was waiting. They moved away a week later. No one blamed them, and Clara, she kept painting. The preacher stopped preaching. The church bell rusted silent, and the whole town sank into a kind of uneasy quiet. Then, one winter evening, the house caught fire. It burned so hot it melted the nails in the doorframe, but when the smoke cleared, there was no sign of Clara's body. Only one unburned painting remained, her wedding portrait, her veil painted in such perfect white that it almost glowed in the ashes. People still find that painting sometimes, in attics in abandoned houses and pawnshops down south. And they say if you look too long at her eyes, you'll see someone standing just behind you. Tell me, would you still hang that painting in your home? Years later, when I was an old man, and the world had quieted into its newer sins, I went back to Blue Hollow. The town had shrunk like a dying lung, only a few houses left, and the church leaning sideways, its steeple pointing toward the valley instead of heaven. They said the well behind the Mayfield house still gave water, though no one dared drink. I went there not as a pilgrim, but as a fool seeking proof that memory hadn't lied to me. The ground was soft with moss, the boards of the porch bending under my boots. The door gave way with a sigh, and inside was only dust and stillness. Yet even in ruin that house felt alive. Every wall seemed to breathe, and the air was thick with something like perfume sweet at first, then coppery like dried blood under varnish. I found the remains of her easel near the hearth. The wood was warped, but the canvas on it was untouched by fire. Just blank linen, waiting for her next stroke, and then I heard it. A voice soft, almost tender, humming a tune I knew from childhood, a hymn about redemption through suffering. It came from upstairs, from the room that used to be hers. The floorboards groaned under my weight like they were warning me not to go. But I did. I had to. The room was lit by a single candle melted into a saucer, flame barely alive. The walls were covered in portraits. Dozens, hundreds, some in oil, some in charcoal, all showing her face. But each painting looked slightly different. Some smiling, some screaming, some with her eyes closed as if in prayer. In one, she wore her bridal veil again, but her mouth was gone, painted over in a thick smear of black. I remember whispering her name, though I can't recall if I said it out loud or only in my head. The air moved then, just a breath, and every candle in every portrait seemed to flicker at once. And in that instant I understood. She wasn't painting him back to life. She was painting herself into the walls, the floor, the very bones of that house. A woman too devout to live, too sinful to rest. That's when the mirror on the far wall began to fog. Slowly, shapes forming in the glass, not mine, not entirely. I saw the outline of a woman behind me, her veil dripping with water, her hands resting gently on my shoulders. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Her voice came close to my ear, and she said, "You shouldn't have come back." I was almost finished with the waiting. Tell me, if you'd been me, would you have run, or would you have asked what she was waiting for? I didn't run. Maybe I couldn't. Her hands were cold but steady, like someone who'd practiced the gesture for a century. The candle flame guttered between us, making her reflection stutter in the glass. Alive, dead, alive again. When I finally turned, the room was empty. Yet the air still held the weight of her breath, and I could smell the same lilac perfume she'd worn the night of the wedding. That was when the sound began, a faint scratching, coming from beneath the floorboards, slow, deliberate, like nails tracing the grain of old wood. I knelt, pried one board loose, and found a stack of small canvases wrapped in cloth. Inside were portraits more disturbing than anything she'd painted before. Each one showed a man, half-finished, his body fading into shadow, his face always turned toward her, as if she had trapped his devotion between layers of paint. At the bottom of each frame, in her curling script, were words from Scripture, twisted to her own design. One read, "The flesh obeys what faith commands." I should have left then, but curiosity is its own sin. I pulled away another board, and there, in the darkness below, I saw something glint. A ring, his ring, still on a finger. The skin had mummified into the wood, as though the floor itself had swallowed him whole. I remember whispering a prayer. I didn't believe in any more. The house seemed to listen, its beams creaking like they were laughing. I stumbled backward, trying to breathe, but the air felt thick, like inhaling smoke. The portraits around the room began to peel, paint sliding, down in long, wet trails, revealing new faces beneath. My own again and again. Some weeping, some smiling, all watching me. I could hear her voice again, humming that same hymn, but now it came from inside the walls. She was everywhere. I dropped the candle, and darkness claimed the room. But before the flame died completely, I saw her one last time, standing in the corner, veil soaked through, eyes hollow, mouth open in a silent hymn. Then she stepped forward, and the floor groaned beneath her as if the house itself bowed to its mistress. If there's a moment when a man's soul cracks, that was mine. I knew then that she hadn't married for love. She'd married to bind him, and through him bind all of us who ever looked upon her beauty and thought we saw grace. Tell me, if sin wears a bridal veil, does that make it holy or just harder to see? It's strange what stays behind after the screaming ends. The paint dried, the wood settled, and the air lost her scent, but the silence never left. I stayed in that house far longer than any sane man should. Maybe I wanted to understand her, or maybe I wanted to see if her ghost still waited for me. Either way, the mountain didn't forgive me for what I found. Each dawn came slower, and the wind began to sound like her name, Eleanor. Eleanor, drawn out like a prayer, too tired to reach heaven. The townsfolk stopped coming up the hill. After word spread of what I'd uncovered, they said the land was cursed, that her spirit walked barefoot between the graves at night, wearing her torn wedding dress, singing for her next groom. I'd buried the paintings behind the chapel, deep, enough that the soil bled dark when the shovel struck. But you can't bury what remembers you. Every time the rain came, I'd see faint colors rising from the dirt, reds and ochres and flesh tones, like her art still breathing under the earth. I tried to leave once. Got as far as the crossroads before I saw her veil hanging from the oak branch there, dripping with morning dew. I turned back without thinking, and the road behind me closed in fog. That's when I understood. This wasn't her haunting me. It was the mountains, and she had only been its mouthpiece, a vessel for something older, lonelier, hungrier than any mortal sin. Now I'm old. My voice barely carries through the night, and the house creaks in rhythm with my breath. Sometimes I wake to find the candle already lit and her portrait, the first one, the one I once thought beautiful, staring down from the wall again, though I burned it years ago. Her eyes seem softer now, forgiving, almost. But maybe that's just my mind trying to make peace with the thing I can't confess to the priest, that I loved her. That part of me still does, so if you're listening, wherever you are, if you ever find yourself drawn to an old house in the hills, where the wind hums like a woman's lullaby, don't go inside. Not unless you're willing to give something of yourself that you can't ever take back. Because love out here isn't tender, it's a covenant carved in bone. And when the veil falls, what's left isn't a bride or a ghost, just the echo of vows spoken too late to matter.